This war is about extinguishing Ukraine's right to exist as a state, plain and simple, and Ukraine's right to exist as a people.
Some strong words against Russia from President Biden at the United Nations today. The president declared that Russia has, quote, violated the core tenets of the United Nations with its brutal, needless war in Ukraine, which has now been going on for 7 months.
Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy also addressed the UN today, calling on members to punish Russia for the war. But Russia is not backing down. The president of Russia announced that about 300,000 more military members could be sent to Ukraine.
So for more on all of this, and there's a lot, we are joined by UC Berkeley political science professor Stephen Fish. Thank you, Professor, for your time. Let's just start with where things do stand in Russia. We've been hearing about the Ukrainians advancing, that a lot of the Russians are leaving their posts, leaving their equipment. And the concern now is that Putin could do something very drastic to try and reclaim some kind of victory in Ukraine. Where do you think things are?
Well, where things are in the big picture, Pam, is that Putin is losing this war. This actually was predictable. You know, the idea that you could go in with 150,000 troops and subdue a country of 44 million people who don't want you there was a crazy idea to begin with. And what we're seeing is this playing out. And of course, it's very embarrassing to Putin. So what does he do now? He suffered from tremendous troop attrition. Half of the people he sent in originally have been killed or wounded. So he has to try to replenish his forces there. The problem is it doesn't matter how many men he throws into this conflict. Most of them don't want to be there. They're very poorly equipped. They're poorly trained. This new wave of people who he's mobilizing is going to be even more poorly equipped and more poorly trained and more demoralized and less intent on being there than the soldiers he's already got. So this is clearly a very desperate measure. To your other point on the danger of nuclear war, again, this is really all he's got left. He's been proven to have a fifth-rate military, largely because of the way he runs it, which is simply by corruption, like everything else in the country. It's a terribly corrupt organization. His allies, including China, are pulling away from him. They basically humiliated him a few days ago at their big conference in Central Asia. And it's clear they're sick of the war as well. So what's he left with? Well, nuclear threats. He says he's not bluffing. We always have to take these things seriously, but this is not new for Putin. Unlike any other leader in the world, every other leader who's got nuclear weapons, except Kim Jong-un, the dictator of North Korea, Putin is oftentimes very irresponsibly, we might add, engaged in this kind of nuclear bluster. But really, again, it's all he's got left. He doesn't have an army. The walls are closing in on him. So what does he do now? He threatens the one thing he's got, which is to basically blow up the world. But let's remember, he's done this a lot before.
Curious about the mood inside Russia right now. Of course, a lot of the dissent has been tamped down. Protesters are being arrested. There's not much on the media there, where there's no open dialogue about what's going on there. We're hearing about flights out of Russia. Those who can get on a flight are fleeing to places like Istanbul, where they don't need a visa. And I read today, I don't know if this is true, but Daily Mail is reporting that people are Googling how to break your arm at home in Russia so they don't have to go in the military. Is it that desperate for Russians who are saying that they're just not going to participate in this?
Absolutely. I mean, you think about this, Ken. Putin has been putting out the call for additional troops since the beginning of this conflict. It's been clear that he doesn't have the troops he needs from the very beginning. He's been scrounging the prisons now, offering prisoners, murderers, clemency if they go and fight in Ukraine. And most of them say, no, we're good here in prison. What's more, he's been offering reasonably high salaries by Russian standards to people, you know, $2,000 or $3,000 a month to go serve, and everybody who's going to take him up on that already has, which aren't very many people. So the people are being mobilized now. These men, you can be sure, don't want to go, or they already would have signed up. So what's happening in Russia basically are several things. First of all, is that everybody's going to do everything they can to get out of this thing. It appears in some public opinion polls that there's wide support for this war, but really that support is about a millimeter deep at this point. When it comes to actually going and serving in this war, very few Russians actually want to do it. So people are going to try to get out of it. What's more, the troops that he does get to go are not going to want to be there. And you're also going to get more brain drain from Russia, more young people leaving.
So,
As you mentioned, the flights out of Russia now, everybody who can get out, who might be mobilized, is getting out right now.
so, Professor, who's standing with Putin at this point? Where are his military leaders? Where are the oligarchs on all of this? Those are some of the people who surround him and have been, quote unquote, yes men for him. What happens from their perspective on this?
You know, they're in trouble too. And they're going to, you know, many of them have to be thinking that we're going to go down with Putin and we're going to be the scapegoats for this thing. Whether any of them will band together and move against Putin is anybody's guess, but I wouldn't rule that out as a possibility. It's true that some of these guys and some of the people in the military industrial complex and these other people from the so-called force ministries that Putin, that kind of run the country along with Putin right now, who he relies on, are going to want to stick with this to the very end. But look, most of them realize, as Putin has to at this point, that they're losing this war. What do they do now? You know, and what they're showing is that they're desperate. They're kind of casting in all directions for something to do right now. But let's face it, the Russian army is tapped out. It really is. And the prospects for actually achieving any of Putin's war aims are really very low.
Professor, we're out of time. Real quick, before we go, real quick, if you could answer this, is this war closer to ending than we might think?
I don't think it's that close to ending. I do think the Russians are going to grind this thing out, but the tide having turned against them, their international, even allies having turned against them, there's much more pressure on Putin than there was earlier on to get out and to find a face-saving exit. The problem is the way he's arranged things, there's no face-saving exit. He's going to have egg all over his face no matter what he does.
Professor Stephen Fish, very interesting analysis. Let's hope that everything you're saying about what's happening with the military there, that this war does start to wind down quicker than, sooner than later. So thank you for your analysis.
Indeed. You're welcome, Pam.